Oh yeah, that's so mellow with I guess 4 young people from Portland. Did you say?
Somewhere out northwest.
Those lovely kids. So that was a fairly mellow song to open up a
Hot topic.
a topic that will be less mellow for our people. And I just wanted to say that it's been being covered. The issue we're going to talk about quite a bit in ProPublica, and our friends at the Hideout had a couple of the writers who have covered their version of this story. But we are as far as I know, the first people to actually have someone here talking about this issue from their side of the story. And that is our new guest, Jim LoBianco from HeartLand Alliance. Welcome to Live from the HeartLand.
Hey, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning, all. Thank you so much for taking the time to have me here this morning. As far as I'm concerned, we can never talk enough about child welfare, so really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, we were a little shocked. It was started over a year ago that we began seeing flyers about jails, kid jails in our neighborhood. And they were not, initially they were unattributed, but then people got more organized and involved. Everything I've read thus far mostly is about denigrating the Washington policy. But given that it came to our neighborhood in the form of a group that we've known for many, many years and have done a lot of, you've done an awful lot of good work with both housing, young people, healthcare, et cetera. We were shocked. So, Tom, I think you organized their questions in good order. So,
Well, the most recent story by ProPublica Illinois took a look at the condition young children who've been separated at the border, which is what we're primarily talking about here. The condition they arrived in Chicago in group homes that Heartland's running, and we want to talk a little bit about why that happened. But in particular, the reporters in July found 15 separated kids who still were in homes for some length of time, who had not been reunited with families. Let's start there. What's with those 15 kids today, a couple months later after this report came out?
So those children have all been reunified with their families. This issue, I appreciate you starting at that point, because it is one of the examples that highlights how incredibly complex and nuanced this issue is, and why I appreciate being here today. One of this concept of separation that happens is much different than the horrific and unjust zero tolerance policy that the president put into place last summer. For years, 25 years, there's been different demarcators of separation, and largely it's to protect against trafficking, which is a real, significant, and pervasive risk to the exploitation and abuse of children. So those children, the 15 you mentioned, had nothing to do with the horrific zero tolerance policy from the previous summer, but were flagged out of a concern that they were not coming to the border with a biological parent, and there was a flag that was a concern, which has Heartland's not privy to those decisions.
is not privy?
No,
Right.
we have nothing to do with the border,
Right.
but we know that after the fact they come to us. So we work hard to reunite those children with a relative, if a relative's here in the country, or to a safe guardian if there
Situation.
is no relative. So those children have been placed. Yes, it's likely that tomorrow we may get a child who falls under the definition of separated, because somewhere in the vetting process at the border there was a concern of trafficking.
So, talk a little bit more generally about the work Heartland does, what you're in charge of as Senior Director of Human Care Services. Immigrant kids aren't the only kind of population that you're dealing with in that program. So, you know, what's your day-to-day work like? Who are the people you're working with?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. And I want to take the opportunity, because you used the phrase in the opening about our neighborhood, and I want to mention that our neighborhood applies to me too. I'm born and raised in Rogers Park, and to speak about the work of Heartland My first experience of Heartland happened when I was in grammar school. My mother was the bookkeeper at St. Ignatius Parish, came home to tell me that they were going to rent the convent to a social service agency
Right.
and run a new program. That program's a Marjorie Kovler Center,
Right.
founded for the sole purpose of caring for survivors of torture around the world. A few,
It's one of the things we should be most protective of in
Yeah.
our neighborhood is having that be situated with us.
A couple years later, our next-door neighbor in Rogers Park rented his second-floor unit to a group of boys from the Sudan. I would come to find out that on the nightly news, they were referred to as the Lost Boys of the Sudan. I didn't know them as that. I knew them as our neighbor. That's why I knew them then, and that's how I refer to them now. And so Rogers Park is my community, and Heartland has been part of that community for decades,
Yeah.
serving immigrants and refugees, asylum seekers, and just those beset by poverty across the city, the country, and internationally, and been doing it for 130 years.
How many group homes are there in Rogers Park?
So, for our youth residential services programs, which I oversee, there are 2 youth residential programs in Rogers Park and 6 across the city. 5 of those 6 serve specifically immigrant and refugee children.
And what are the span of ages of the children and the length of their stays?
Sure, span of ages is 0 to 17. We serve minors licensed by DCFS. And how do we get to 0? It's because we run a program for pregnant and parenting teens that come to us as well.
Wow.
Do the kids get to leave the home?
Yes.
Do they go to school? They can go out and play in the field school, run around the track, things like that?
Absolutely. They're minors, and they're in our custodial care. So this has nothing to do with their immigration status. Prior to coming to Heartland, I worked for a homeless youth agency where we ran a minor shelter. And because we have custodial care, the children are always chaperoned and under our protection. But absolutely, they go on field trips. We have programs that do cross-cultural integration in the Chicago public school system. The kids are out at the beach. They're in the museums. They're at the Art Institute. So yes, of course, they're always being chaperoned, but absolutely. These are not locked-down facilities.
Do they go to school?
Yes, we provide educational classes within
Within,
the
not-
shelter
they
system.
don't go to the
They're
local
not-
schools.
They're not integrated into the public school system, no. We have certified teachers on staff that are providing educational classes.
Where would these children be if not here? Where would they be if they weren't living in these 2 homes?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the reasons that I'm so committed to the work we do is because unless somebody else can answer how these children are to be cared for, especially and protected, especially because they can't protect themselves, I don't understand what the alternative is if Heartland gets out of this business. And more to that point about Heartland's role and Chicago's role as a sanctuary city, frankly, I would want more beds here in Chicago to care for these children, because what better environment and community than one is passionate about immigrant rights than to care for them in this city? There are other states that this work goes on in, and I'm not sure those states or municipalities are interested in scrutinizing, bringing transparency, and advocating for the human rights of these children as our neighbors in Chicago do.
Well, we have some advocates right outside the door right now, just so you know. For the first time ever, we have protests at the Live from the Heartland show.
So they're not listening to the show,
No,
clearly.
they're definitely not hearing your answers. So we'll keep forging ahead to talk about the challenges that you and they face in this unfolding. Why would some former staff and now neighbors see Heartland as a jailer of kidnapped kids for profit? Or is that unfair to ask you?
No. Well, I don't think it's about fairness. So
Okay.
I'm here and I'm going to answer your question to the best that I can. I would start by saying that my entire life, those 50 or so years, and for decades before that, this country has been incapable of passing comprehensive immigration reform.
Right.
Sensible immigration reform rooted in social justice and human rights. That is outrageous and soul-crushing for everyone who's been in that mix trying to pass that level of just and fair reform. And I think the frustration bubbles up, and you start to broaden your targets to try to achieve your ends. The reason I start with that answer is I think the frustration to try to solve this problem has caused people to misunderstand the role of those of us who, in HeartLand's case, for well over 100 years, have been trying to heal and care for and be part of the solution. So this concept of jails, also the misinformation and confusion is that the work that we have been doing and other child welfare agencies have been doing is in any way connected to the abominable treatment and behavior that's happening at the U.S. borders, which is well documented and verified. That is not anything we're connected to. We are outraged by it. HeartLand has repeatedly released public statements, and our National Immigrant Justice Center, NIJC, is suing and party to multiple lawsuits to prevent that kind of unjust, cruel, and inhumane treatment. So I think it's a conflagration and a confusion.
Good word.
Can you talk a little bit about how your caseworkers actually accomplish reunification?
Oh, absolutely. Just like, I think the biggest thing here is that we are a child welfare program. And so this concept of a child entering into of any child, regardless of immigration status, entering into the child welfare system, the most important thing is to get that child placed into a safe, secure environment where they can thrive, regardless if they're born in Guatemala, India, China, or Cook County. And so this family reunification process follows those same kind of processes to make sure that when that child leaves our care, that they're not just going to be safe, but they're going to thrive. And so our case managers and social workers work hard to contact legitimate relatives, or in many cases, they're not a blood relative, but it's a guardian or entering into a foster care situation. So safety is paramount.
That's what's tricky. I mean, DCFS is a troubled agency.
Yes.
And I mean, I just saw something, I don't know if it's recent or it was a rerun on, Father John Smith out at Maryville, who DCFS covered for, basically. I don't know if they meant to, but ultimately it winds up that them not going after him after the first word comes, and I understand not trusting the first word, and when do you start believing that people are in danger, that children are in danger? But DCFS is all we've got. So how do we make it better? And how do you feel secure trusting them as your partner in this whole process?
That's a great question. I'm just going to fess up and tell you that I am not going to be able to answer this.
I appreciate your fess.
But I think going back to my earlier statement of why I think Chicago is absolutely the right city to be caring for these immigrant children is because you can't just rely on any one entity. The fact that last summer the city council asked HeartLand to come in and explain the work we do, the fact that I'm here today explaining the work we do, we need more than one set of eyes on this.
Right.
And HeartLand is absolutely committed to full transparency, and we will stand with the scrutiny. So your answer to your question is we need as many eyes as possible.
Yeah.
Because there is no greater responsibility than the care of our children.
Yeah.
Does the kind of contract that you have with the federal government around a flawed policy belie your mission as a human rights organization?
That
good
is a
question.
great question. We ask ourselves every day. I talk to my teams when I go visit our shelters. After last summer, I came up with a phrase that needs to be our bellwether, and that is, are we, as the youth residential program, executing HeartLand's human rights agenda, or are we collaborating with a system of oppression? That is a hard question, and that is a question I ask myself every day, and that is a question I challenge my coworkers and colleagues to ask ourselves every day.
What's your answer today?
What our answer today is we are providing the best care for children who can't protect themselves in an array of services, trauma-informed care. For instance, just this month, the Federal Office of the Inspector General released a report acknowledging that the presidential decision last summer around zero tolerance inflicted extraordinary trauma on those children. HeartLand didn't have to wait a year to know that. We knew it within weeks, and we actually brought in therapists from the Kovler Center, clinicians specializing in helping survivors of torture, brought them in to help our kids recover from the trauma inflicted at the border. So my answer is that we are investing every resource into the medical care of our children, the clinical care of our children, and to get them into a safe and loving home as quickly as possible.
Jim, when growing up in Rogers Park, and you talked about how you discovered this organization, was it still Travelers and Immigrant Aid, or had it become HeartLand at that point?
So, interestingly, 130 years ago, it was founded as Immigrant and Travelers Aid, and that program still exists under that name today.
Okay.
That subtlety of timeline, I'm not exactly sure how all that worked, but yeah, we are now, my company that I work for is HeartLand Human Care Services, but Immigrant and Travelers Aid is still an operating program.
Huh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Do you guys take volunteers? Do you accept volunteers?
Across the many companies at HeartLand, we have a number of volunteer opportunities, and I would encourage people to go to the website.
How do they find that?
So I would recommend they go to heartlandalliance.org and use the volunteer portal.
Our new alderwoman, Maria Haddon, came and visited. I wonder if you would share that, and I'm going to throw another question. Have you had any discussion at all with the people who are being critical of you? I mean, they clearly reacted to you coming on the show. They came down here with a little demonstration. I don't know if they know the history and the details. When they first put out information, they didn't put a name on it. That group is evolving. I'm sure they're well-intentioned. So 2 questions. Any dialogue with them, and how did the meeting with the alderwoman go?
So I would, certainly want Alderwoman Haddon to speak for herself.
Yes.
What I will say is we are incredibly grateful for the time that she put in to visit our programs.
I'm glad she did.
About 3 hours, which is a significant amount of time to spend with our staff and our kids. We're grateful for that. We continue to invite any elected who's interested in coming in, community leaders, heads of philanthropy and foundations. We are grateful, just as I'm grateful today, for this opportunity. Relative to conversations with anyone who's been critical of us, but I can say specifically to the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, that there have been face-to-face meetings with HeartLand leadership and the leadership of the DSA. There continue to be differences of opinion, but we are always open to meeting. I think the important thing is that those meetings happen in constructive ways that can actually allow respectful dialogue and conversation, and that is the context in which they have previously occurred. But yes, we have spoken, and I would say this, that I respect the grassroots agitation. The injustices.
We're for grassroots agitation.
Absolutely. The injustices being perpetrated against human beings in great need is outrageous. At the same time, I will say that the concept of smearing HeartLand as baby jailers is misinformed. But I stand with the core tenets personally, and HeartLand stands with it as a policy, as an agency, and has for 130 years.
Well, I'm sure this will be the start of an ongoing discussion, and we really appreciate, Jim, your coming on and joining us today.
Really?
Jim LoBianco is the Senior Director of HeartLand Human Care Services, responsible for youth residential services, which includes the homes that are currently housing detained children who end up here from the border.
Who have been reunited with someone, according to our interview today. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate your being here very much.
You're
Thank
listening
all
to
of you.
Live from the Heartland of WLUW Chicago, 88.7 FM.
And we're going to go out with an opening song called Mississippi Boy.